Hey guys, tonight we're diving fork first into something a little grimy, a little bland, and oddly fascinating. Imagine you're crouched behind a muddy embankment in 1943, helmet slightly askew, the distant pop of artillery pulsing through the earth beneath you. Your stomach growls, but your only hope of silencing it is a small, rectangular cardboard box, a K ration. Inside, something that will neither comfort nor delight you, but it will keep you alive. Barely. This is the reality of food in World War II, and trust me, you probably won't survive this breakfast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun seeing who's lying in bed across the world with a can of imaginary powdered eggs by their side. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach into the K-ration box, pulling out its contents with a mixture of hope and dread. There's a wax-sealed biscuit bar, a tin of meat, maybe ham, maybe dog food, who knows, some toilet paper, not technically edible but tempting, a packet of instant coffee, 4 pieces of gum, and a small chocolate disc that tastes like punishment. The K-ration was designed to be light, portable, and crammed with calories, offering around 2,830 of them per day across breakfast, lunch, and dinner boxes. Gourmet? No. Necessary? Absolutely. Originally developed by physiologist Ansel Keys, yes, the same guy who later gave us the Mediterranean diet, ironic, right? The K-ration was meant for short-term use by paratroopers, tank crews, and special ops. Historians still argue whether it was ever truly intended as a long-term feeding solution or if the military just ignored that memo. Each K-ration came with its own color code, breakfast in olive drab, supper in red, dinner in blue. You, of course, get the red one, meaning it's supper, and inside is a can labeled cheese and bacon spread. It sounds promising. You peel it open, and an oily, slightly metallic aroma greets your nose like a slap with a dirty glove. You spread it onto one of the rock-hard crackers using the back of your spoon, because knives are a luxury reserved for people not currently being shot at. Across the Atlantic, British troops had their own version, the 24-hour ration pack. Slightly more organized, slightly less edible. You might find tins of corned beef, hardtack biscuits, and, if you're lucky, some jam. Tea was non-negotiable. A war might be raging, but that didn't mean you skipped your 4 p.m. brew. Meanwhile, American GIs developed a love-hate relationship with Spam. The infamous canned meat showed up in every variation, from fried to cold to disguised in stews. You might joke about it now, but when your choices were Spam or starvation, you'd eventually find a way to love it. Sort of? Maybe? Okay, not really, but at least it didn't bite back. Then there was the D-ration bar, a high-calorie chocolate bar designed not to melt, not to taste good, and not to be eaten unless absolutely necessary. You take a bite and instantly regret it. It's like gnawing on wax mixed with sand. Soldiers were known to toss them out or trade them to unsuspecting locals who hadn't yet developed the proper level of distrust. One quirk you notice as you peel open each item, everything smells faintly like cardboard and desperation. The wax packaging did a decent job preserving the food, but it also ensured every flavor had the undertone of, "I've been in a warehouse for 6 months." Some guys would spice things up with captured condiments or by roasting things over a fire, if the enemy wasn't shooting at them for it. Creativity was survival. There's something meditative, even hypnotic, about the slow unwrapping of a ration kit. Each component carefully engineered, tested, and distributed to ensure your body keeps moving, even if your taste buds wave the white flag. You chew slowly, eyes scanning the horizon, and reflect on the absurdity that billions of dollars in war machinery still left you chewing processed cheese in a tin. And here's the weird bit. Troops sometimes craved these meals later. Once the war ended, veterans would write home about the weird nostalgia for those terrible rations. A bite of Spam decades later might conjure muddy boots, jokes in the trench, or the relief of a hot cup of instant coffee on a freezing morning. The taste of survival, even if it was bad, stuck around. The meat spread clings stubbornly to your spoon as you try to coax the last bits from the can. You toss the gum into your mouth, minty, hard, and oddly comforting. A single stick to clean your teeth, freshen your breath, and remind you that, yes, the military thought of everything, even if the results were questionable at best. And the coffee? It's instant, slightly sour.
You step quietly through a shattered village, the air heavy with dust and distant echoes of battle. Somewhere nearby, the smell of sauerkraut mingles with burnt rice, an odd olfactory reminder that the Axis powers soldiers had their own peculiar food realities. You peek into a soldier's ration pack, curious to see what sustains a German, Italian, or Japanese fighter far from home. German soldiers carried what was called the Erbswurst, a kind of pea sausage, essentially a concentrated tube of dried peas and fat meant to be reconstituted with water. It looks unappetizing, like greenish clay, but packs a punch of calories and protein. You try to imagine squeezing it out onto a stale slice of bread. Historians still argue whether the Erbswurst was actually nourishing or just a last-ditch survival tool, a testament to the hardships on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, Italian troops relied heavily on simple staples: hard bread called pane de guerra, olive oil if they were lucky, and sometimes dried fish. The Mediterranean diet of peace was replaced by a wartime diet of scarcity and improvisation. Food shortages were rampant, and soldiers often supplemented rations with foraged herbs or snatched fresh produce from nearby farms. If you squint, the rations almost seem elegant compared to others, but that's just perspective. Japanese soldiers carried dried rice balls, hoshi-e, or hard rice, and small packets of pickled vegetables, designed to be lightweight and long-lasting. You pick one up, noticing how dense and hard it feels. It's an efficient ration, but chewing it requires serious jaw power. It's also a cultural echo of centuries-old preservation techniques. The Japanese diet during the war emphasized rice over meat, reflecting both tradition and resource scarcity. Here's a quirky bit. German soldiers were rumored to sneak small live frogs into their rations for a quick protein snack. Whether that was true or wartime myth is up for debate, but it's a testament to how inventive soldiers had to be when supplies ran thin. You glance at a Japanese soldier methodically peeling a packet of natto, fermented soybeans with a notoriously strong smell. It's an acquired taste, to put it mildly, but it's packed with nutrients. To Western noses, it's borderline offensive, but to the soldier, it's survival. Food preferences and tolerances become a battlefield themselves. In Italy, guerrilla fighters and soldiers alike scavenged wild herbs to season their meals, sometimes mixing bitter greens with whatever meat was available. The herb rosmarino, or rosemary, was prized for masking the metallic taste of canned meats. You imagine that sharp, piney aroma cutting through the monotony of rations. Historians still argue whether Axis rations were more a reflection of ideology or pure logistics. Did the Nazi obsession with self-sufficiency hamper their supply chains more than their enemies? Were cultural food habits a strength or a liability in prolonged conflict? You hear a story from a captured German soldier who recalls trading his Erbswurst tube for a tin of American Spam. The trade-off, his craving for fatty, processed meat, overcame patriotism for a moment. It's an unexpected reminder that hunger doesn't care about flags. One day, you stumble across a weathered Italian cookbook dropped near a frontline dugout. Its pages are stained and torn, but the recipes hint at a life far removed from war. Tomato sauce thick with garlic, pasta shapes you can barely pronounce, fresh basil. A bittersweet reminder that food is memory, even in war. As you continue your walk, you think about the varied flavors and smells that surrounded soldiers on all sides. Sauerkraut tang, smoky olive oil, fermented soy. The sensory landscape of WW2 was as diverse as the battlefields themselves. And while soldiers on all fronts shared hunger, their rations also told stories of national identity, survival strategies, and sometimes sheer improvisation. You tuck the empty ration wrappers into your pack, their crinkling noise a faint soundtrack to the fading light. Tomorrow, you'll eat again, somewhere between a can and a wild herb, a cooked stew and a rice ball. The war marches on, and so does the hunger. The camp buzzes softly as you wander among rows of tents, a steaming tin of weak tea cradled between your hands. Even in war, habits die hard. British soldiers insist on their cuppa, no matter how muddy the ground or loud the nearby machine guns. You sip cautiously, the bitter warmth spreading slowly through your fingers, wondering how the simplest drink became a symbol of endurance. Tea wasn't just a beverage, it was a lifeline. The British government imported vast quantities of it, convinced that soldiers who drank tea would stay sharp, alert, and, most importantly, British. A hot cup in the morning was a ritual, a tiny comfort in the chaos. You see it everywhere. Soldiers gathering around small, battered kettles, clutching their enamel mugs like life buoys. On the other side of camp, a French soldier unwraps a crusty baguette and some cheese, remnants of a world slowly slipping away under occupation and resistance. Food, here, carried culture's weight. A bite of bread wasn't just sustenance. It was a connection to home, to family dinners, to Sunday markets. War tried to strip that away, but the stubborn tastes remained. And then there's the oddity of British rations: powdered eggs, canned corned beef, and a curious addition called bulldog sauce, a tangy condiment invented to pep up the often bland meals. You squint at the label, wondering if it's a secret weapon or just a bottle of ketchup's awkward cousin. Soldiers joke that if the sauce could win the war, it would have already. The United States, meanwhile, had its own food culture clash unfolding overseas. GIs found themselves trading parts of their K-rations for British chocolate bars or the infamous hardtack biscuits, which, let's be honest, could probably chip concrete. The exchange was part survival, part social glue, and part an unspoken language of friendship in a world turned upside down. Historians still argue whether food preferences shaped alliances or just reflected broader cultural differences on the battlefield. Did shared meals build camaraderie, or did hunger and rationing breed resentment and rivalry? Probably a bit of both. You wander into the officer's mess tent, where the smells are surprisingly richer: stews thick with vegetables, freshly baked bread, and, if you're lucky, a cup of proper coffee. Officers had access to better rations and more cooking equipment, though the food was rarely lavish, just better. You overhear a conversation about rationing back home and how families adjusted recipes: meatless Mondays, root vegetable pies, and endless cups of tea to stretch the meals further. Food wasn't just a battlefield concern, it was a national effort, a shared sacrifice woven into daily life. Back outside, a British soldier cracks open a tin of bully beef, their nickname for canned corned beef. The texture is strange, chunky, greasy, and oddly comforting in its familiarity. You try a bite and think, well, it's not bad, but it's also not something you'd ask for at a restaurant. There's a quirky little story about how some soldiers tried to improve bully beef by mixing it with instant coffee granules to mask the taste. The result? A slurry so bad it was promptly banned in most camps. You can't help but smile at the lengths people will go to for flavor. Tea time is interrupted by the arrival of a small crate labeled condensed milk, a precious commodity. Soldiers treat it like liquid gold, stirring it into their tea or dolloping it on biscuits. You dunk your own biscuit, the sweetness a brief reprieve from the harshness of the day. And just as you take another sip, you remember the local markets you passed through days ago. Street vendors selling fresh bread, olives, and wine, a stark contrast to the ration packs and tins you carry. The soldiers envied those simple pleasures, but they also knew better than to indulge too openly. Food was as much a security risk as a morale booster. You tuck your empty tin into your pack and finish the last of your tea. The camp settles into a quiet lull.
the distant clang of a mess hall bell signaling the next round of feeding. Food here is a rhythm, a heartbeat between the chaos. As you walk back to your tent, you catch a whiff of burnt wood and spices. Someone's managed to rig a small stove to cook stew. It's an illusion of normalcy in a world turned upside down. You wonder if someday these scents will bring you back, not just to a place, but to a time when survival meant more than just eating to stay alive.
Your boots sink deeper into the muck, the foxhole barely shielding you from the icy drizzle seeping into your collar. You sit there, spoon in one gloved hand, tin of beans in the other, pretending not to notice the faint smell of gunpowder drifting on the breeze. Welcome to chow time in the trenches. Romantic? Not even close. Necessary? As vital as your rifle. You flick the top off your tin. Well, try to. The lid's been half crushed by a boot, and you have to pry it open with a bayonet. Inside, cold, congealed beans in a sauce that's more rust-colored than red. You scoop up a bite and let it sit on your tongue, willing yourself to pretend it's something home-cooked. It's not, of course. It's army issue, mass-produced, and very much not warm. The trenches weren't the muddy zigzags of World War I this time around, but they still popped up during prolonged battles. Places like Anzio or Normandy turned into half-settled holding zones. And when the bullets stopped for 5 minutes, it was time to eat. Not in a cafeteria, mind you, right there, in the cold dirt, surrounded by old shell casings and a guy trying to remember the taste of real butter. One mainstream historical fact stands out. World War II saw the most advanced logistical feeding effort in military history to date. Millions of soldiers across multiple continents, each requiring 3,000 plus calories a day. Getting that food to the front meant trains, planes, ships, trucks, mules, and often just your own 2 hands. The Quartermaster Corps was feeding an army that never slept and definitely never sat down for a proper dinner. You look over and see a fellow soldier hunched beside a tiny trench stove, basically a can filled with solidified fuel tablets. It smells like a chemical fire, but it gets the job done. He's trying to heat a tin of something mysterious. Could be beef stew, could be peaches. In this light, they look the same. Historians still argue whether warming the food made much of a difference nutritionally, but mentally, a hot meal, even lukewarm, could drag a guy back from the edge. There's something about the steam rising from a dented tin that reminds you of home kitchens and better days. Cold food just doesn't hold the same magic. And yet, most meals in a foxhole are eaten cold. The time, noise, and risk of lighting a flame often weren't worth it. You'd crouch there, elbow to elbow, chewing quietly while trying not to think about whether a sniper was sighting you over his lunch. Every now and then, you'd get a real treat. Someone finds a ration tin of peaches or a can of Vienna sausages. Instantly, half the platoon migrates like moths. There's no such thing as eating in peace. You trade 2 biscuits and a cigarette for one of those peaches. It's a good trade. Sweetness was rare, and fruit practically mythical. You savor each bite like it's stolen treasure. One soldier nearby tries to spice up his meal with a pinch of salt he's been hoarding in a matchbox. Another has a crumpled packet of ketchup saved from a Red Cross parcel. You'd be amazed what flavor can do for morale. Some guys even carried tiny bottles of Tabasco. Modern soldiers still do. Because when the world's falling apart, at least your beans can have a kick. You start to feel the food settle in your belly. It's not satisfying exactly, but it's grounding. Like weights in your pockets, keeping you tied to the present. You're reminded of that guy who traded 3 days' worth of rations for a chocolate cake from a French village. Was it worth it? Absolutely. The cake, reportedly, was stale and dry, but it was cake in a war. That story still gets passed around the squad like a bedtime fairy tale. Sometimes the Army managed to rotate in field kitchens, large mobile cooking units that tried to deliver hot meals to the front. They'd roll in, set up giant metal pots over roaring fires, and ladle out stews that smelled faintly edible. But in active combat zones, those moments were few and far in between. Most meals, like this one, were consumed huddled low, eyes darting to the tree line, spoon scraping noisily against the tin. You shift slightly, trying to stretch your legs in the cramped space. Another soldier grumbles something about beans, and you both share a half laugh. The humor's thin, but it's enough. That's what food did, created little moments of humanity between firefights. Cold or hot, gross or passable, it gave you a reason to pause. Quirky tidbit of the night, some GIs reportedly created foxhole fondue. They'd melt processed cheese from their ration tins using a lighter or tiny flame, then dip their hardtack crackers into the gooey mess. It was a culinary abomination.
The morning fog clings to your clothes as you trudge toward the supply tent, the crunch of frost underfoot punctuating the silence. You've learned that no matter how advanced the war becomes, food logistics remains stubbornly old-fashioned. Trucks rattling over mud, horses pulling wagons, and the endless wait for shipments from distant factories. Feeding an army is like trying to fill a bathtub with a teaspoon. You reach the supply tent and spot the quartermaster poring over a stack of ration cards. Each soldier gets a daily allotment, meticulously planned down to the calorie and vitamin. It's impressive in theory, 3 meals a day, balanced, nutritious, but the reality? Well, it's a bit messier. The most common American ration during World War II was the K ration, a compact, lightweight box designed for short-term use. Inside, you find an eclectic mix: canned meat or cheese, crackers, chocolate bars, instant coffee, and gum. It's like a survival snack pack, perfect for a quick dash or a long haul. But eating nothing but K rations for days on end, that's a recipe for cabin fever and vitamin deficiencies. Soldiers joked that the K ration was invented by someone who hated soldiers, since it lacked the comfort of a real meal. You poke around and find a dehydrated ham loaf. It looks like a science experiment gone wrong, but supposedly packs the protein punch you need. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some GIs developed ration cocktails, mixing canned items with water or coffee to create questionable soups or stews. These improvised concoctions were often more psychological than nutritional, but helped stave off monotony. Not every recipe was a hit. One included chewing gum and powdered eggs, which, as you can imagine, didn't catch on. Historians still argue whether the K ration was effective for long-term use or just a stopgap that forced soldiers to scavenge additional food. The military's attempt at a one-size-fits-all solution sometimes ignored the complex reality of human appetite and morale. You shuffle through a pile of other ration types, including the C ration, designed for more stationary troops. Unlike the K ration, the C ration came in large cans and included items like canned beef stew and potatoes. It was heavier but more satisfying if you could find a way to heat it. Many soldiers turned to field improvisation, stashing personal stashes of candy, canned fruit, or even fresh eggs whenever they could. The black market for treats was surprisingly lively, and morale soared with even the smallest taste of something sweet or fresh. You notice an old pack of powdered eggs, yellow and crumbly, far from the fluffy omelets you imagine. Mixing these with a bit of water was standard practice, but soldiers often described the results as rubber-flavored or worse. Yet they ate it because protein was precious. Another story circulates about a soldier who used his helmet to fry the powdered eggs over a campfire. The eggs stuck to the metal like glue, and the soldier ended up with a crunchy, smoky breakfast that no one envied, but everyone secretly admired. Resourcefulness, you realize, was just as critical as the rations themselves. You take a sip from a canteen, the bitter water washing down the thought of another day eating the same recycled processed foods. It's not gourmet, but it keeps you alive. And in war, that's the main course. As the day moves on, you catch sight of a Red Cross volunteer handing out fresh fruit and chocolate bars to the troops. These parcels were a lifeline, reminding soldiers of home and normal life beyond the front lines. You reach out for a piece of chocolate, feeling the familiar rush of sweetness flood your senses. You think about how these small luxuries, rare and fleeting, were more than just calories. They were reminders of life before the war and maybe a life waiting to return.
The steady drizzle blurs the landscape into a watercolor of grays and greens as you settle into the routine of another soggy day. Mud clings to your boots, and your clothes are damp from the mist, but the hunger gnaws quietly, demanding attention. It's time for a compo, the nickname soldiers gave their composite rations, a curious blend of preservation and pragmatism. Composite rations were the backbone of many armies' food supply, designed to last for months and withstand the rigors of transport. They came packed in tins, cans, and sealed bags, often indistinguishable from one another except for faded stamps or handwritten labels. Opening one was like unwrapping a mystery box, sometimes a treat, often a challenge. You reach into a tin stamped powdered potato flakes, dumping a pale pile into your mess kit. The flakes dissolve into hot water, turning into a starchy, slightly lumpy mash. Not exactly mashed potatoes like your mom made, but it's filling. A few bites later, you spot a soldier stirring a pot of lime juice concentrate, a standard vitamin C supplement meant to prevent scurvy. You sip a dollop. It's tart, almost bitter, but vital. The British compo ration included tins of corned beef, bully beef, jam, biscuits, and sometimes condensed milk. You carefully unwrap a biscuit, its dry texture begging for a dip into tea or coffee. Soldiers joke that these biscuits double as weapons if the fighting ever gets slow. Quirky fact, some soldiers kept biscuit crumbs in their pockets to sprinkle into tea, hoping it would mimic the experience of dunking. Others swore by crushing the biscuits into a powder and mixing them with water to create a soldier's soup, not very tasty, but better than nothing. Historians still argue whether these composite rations did more harm than good in terms of morale and health. The long shelf life often came at the cost of flavor and nutrient degradation, but without them, armies would have faced starvation or worse. You notice a small handwritten note tucked inside a ration box, an old joke or a message from a previous user. It reads, "Eat well, fight better." A simple motto, but a powerful reminder of the link between food and fighting spirit. Suddenly, a distant explosion echoes, and the line to the mess tent quickens. Food is more than survival here. It's a momentary shield against the chaos. You share a smile with the soldier next to you, both knowing that no matter how bad the rations, you're not alone. Food is a shared experience, binding you through the cold, the mud, and the uncertainty. As the rain lightens, you tuck the empty tins into your pack, ready for the next meal, the next ration, the next small battle won with a hot bite and a little hope. The chill of dawn wraps around you like a wool blanket as you settle into your makeshift kitchen, a cleared patch of earth with a simple tripod and a battered pot hanging over a flickering flame. Cooking in the field isn't glamorous, but it's necessary. You learn quickly that a hot meal can change everything. Rations aside, many soldiers became expert foragers and cooks out of necessity. Fresh ingredients were rare, but when you stumbled across a handful of wild onions or a cluster of mushrooms, you treated them like gold. Sometimes these wild finds made their way into communal pots, adding flavor and a hint of normalcy to otherwise bland stews. In the Pacific Theater, American soldiers often supplemented their rations with local fruit, tropical mangoes, bananas, and coconuts, which offered a burst of vitamins and a touch of sweetness in a world of canned meat. You watch a group carefully slicing into a coconut, the sharp juice spilling over their hands. It's a small taste of paradise amid the jungle's relentless humidity. You overhear a story about a soldier who used his helmet to boil water and cook rice from a captured Japanese ration pack, adding wild herbs to mask the blandness. The improvised meal became a shared moment, bonding a ragtag group of soldiers from different backgrounds. It's an example of food bridging divides in the harshest conditions. Back in Europe, soldiers developed a sort of underground economy, trading rations, cigarettes, and homemade treats. Sweet chocolate bars were the currency of choice, often exchanged for salty canned meats or fresh bread stolen from nearby villages.
You spot a small group huddled around a package of Swiss chocolate, eyes gleaming like children on Christmas morning. A quirky fact, some soldiers swore by adding coffee grounds to their canned stews, claiming it enhanced flavor and gave them an extra caffeine kick. Others called it sacrilege, insisting that coffee was best enjoyed black and hot, not as a seasoning. The debate raged on around campfires and mess tables. Historians still argue whether such improvisations and barter systems helped sustain morale or complicated supply lines. Did the freedom to trade and cook foster camaraderie, or did it create inequalities and resentment? Probably a little of both. You kneel beside the fire, stirring a pot of stew that's part canned meat, part foraged vegetables, and part soldier ingenuity. The smell is rich and earthy, a welcome change from the metallic tang of canned goods. You dip a crust of bread into the stew, the warmth spreading through your fingers. In the distance, the chatter of soldiers blends with the crackle of the fire and the rustle of leaves. These moments, simple, shared, warm, become the heartbeat of life at war. You think about how food, even in the smallest gestures, carries the weight of home. It's not just calories, it's comfort, culture, and connection. As night falls and you extinguish the fire, you tuck the last piece of bread into your pocket, knowing tomorrow's meal might be another mix of ration tins and wild scavenging. But for now, the taste of stew and the warmth of the fire are enough.
The sun barely peeks over the horizon as you shoulder your pack and join a line of soldiers waiting for the morning meal. The air smells of damp wool and wood smoke, and somewhere nearby, a rusty kettle hisses on a makeshift stove. Today, you're lucky. A fresh ration shipment arrived last night, and the cooks are busy preparing something close to edible. Army cooks were often unsung heroes, turning minimal ingredients into meals that could boost morale, or at least prevent mutiny. They had to be creative, turning cans of mystery meat and powdered potatoes into something that resembled comfort food. Not every dish was a hit, but the effort was real. You're handed a steaming bowl of navy bean soup, thick and hearty, flecked with tiny bits of meat and onions. It smells faintly sweet, a smell that sticks to your fingers as you lift the spoon to your lips. The soup is salty, with a texture somewhere between creamy and gritty, but it's warm and filling. You remember a quirky story about a Navy ship's cook who spiked the bean soup with a dash of rum. Word spread fast, and soon sailors were trading extra cans for the secret ingredient. The captain eventually caught on and confiscated the bottle, but the legend lived on, passed from sailor to sailor like a treasured myth. Historians still argue whether such bootleg cooking was widespread or isolated incidents. Some say it was a coping mechanism to deal with bland food. Others believe it was a morale risk, risking discipline over flavor. Either way, it highlights how food and culture collide in wartime. In your soup bowl, the beans mush together with potatoes and little flecks of what might be carrots. It's not glamorous, but the warmth seeps into your bones, a welcome contrast to the chill. You find yourself savoring each bite, knowing full well that the next meal might be canned and cold. Behind the mess tent, you spot a small group of soldiers sharing a tin of liver spread. It's a pasty, grayish concoction that some swear by as a protein source. You're skeptical, but you watch as one guy scoops it onto a cracker and nods approvingly. Not bad once you get past the smell, he jokes. There's a debate among historians about the nutritional value versus the psychological impact of these spreads. Did they actually keep soldiers healthier, or were they just a placebo for morale? Either way, the spread's reputation ranged from delicacy to prison food, depending on who you asked. The conversation shifts to hardtack, a rock-hard biscuit that's been a soldier's staple for centuries. You bite into one, feeling your teeth protest as the biscuit crumbles in your mouth. Legend says soldiers used hardtack for everything, from emergency chewing gum to makeshift weapons. You can see why. It's practically indestructible. One veteran once shared how he used hardtack crumbs to thicken soup when rations ran low. Not the tastiest trick, but effective. It's this kind of survival ingenuity that becomes folklore among troops. You glance at the sky, clouds thickening and promising rain. The smell of damp earth mixes with the faint scent of stew and toasted bread. This small moment of warmth and fullness feels like a quiet victory amid the chaos. You finish your soup and toss the empty bowl into the refuse pile, careful to keep the noise low. You tuck a small piece of hardtack into your pocket for later. Emergency rations never go out of style. As you walk back to your post, the taste of the bean soup lingers, a little bitter, a little salty, and surprisingly comforting. Food here isn't just survival, it's a thread weaving you back to a world beyond the trenches, foxholes, and battlefields.
The sun's pale rays filter through the canopy as you navigate the dense jungle, each step soft against the mossy floor. The humid air wraps around you like a wet blanket, and the buzz of insects fills the background like a relentless lullaby. Food here isn't just about sustenance, it's about adapting to an environment that seems intent on making life difficult. In the Pacific Theater, soldiers often face the challenge of supplementing their rations with what the jungle offered. You watch as a soldier carefully peels back the rough skin of a wild yam, the starchy flesh revealing itself like a hidden treasure. These natural carbohydrates were essential, especially when canned supplies ran low. You remember reading that some soldiers resorted to eating local insects like fried crickets or roasted ants when other options were scarce. It's not the most appetizing thought, but those insects provided much-needed protein and were surprisingly nutritious. Not exactly a delicacy, but better than hunger. A quirky wartime survival guide advised troops to carry a small tin of survival gum, flavored with mint to mask unpleasant tastes and double as a digestive aid. The mint gum also helped keep spirits up during long patrols. Chewing gum as a morale booster? Historians still debate the psychological impact versus its actual necessity in rations. You spot a group peeling slices of sea rations alongside freshly picked jungle fruit, combining processed with natural in a curious culinary dance. One soldier jokes that jungle fruit tastes like sunshine, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of canned meat. You pause to observe the process of cooking with minimal equipment, a helmet, a small pot, and a makeshift fire ring. The soldiers take turns stirring a pot of rice and whatever scraps they can find, seasoning with wild herbs when possible. The smell is smoky and earthy, far better than the usual ration fare. There's a story about a soldier who captured a wild pig and roasted it over a spit made from branches, inviting his entire unit to share the feast. Moments like these became legendary, offering a brief respite from monotony and fear. Historians still argue how much local food sources truly helped versus how much risk they posed. Food poisoning, unfamiliar plants, and even local diseases made for a dangerous gamble. Yet for many, the jungle's offerings were a lifeline. You tuck a small wild berry into your mouth, its tartness awakening your senses and reminding you that even in war, nature's flavors persist. As you trudge on, the blend of canned rations and jungle fare feels like a metaphor for survival itself. Part planned, part improvised, all essential. The cold air bites through your jacket as you settle near a makeshift fire in a bombed-out village somewhere in Europe. Smoke curls upward, mixing with the scent of wet earth and burnt timber. Tonight, your meal is a quiet reminder that even amidst destruction, the basic human need for nourishment remains constant. For many soldiers in the European theater, fresh food was a rare luxury. The supply lines were stretched thin, and ration packs sometimes arrived late or in damaged condition. So, scavenging became a routine part of daily life, an unspoken skill among troops. You spot a group carefully dismantling a nearby abandoned farmhouse, searching for anything edible. Canned goods, fresh eggs, even a few potatoes hidden in a cellar. You recall that during the harsh winter months, soldiers sometimes buried rations in the snow to preserve them, only to find them frozen solid hours later. One humorous account tells of a soldier who tried to thaw his canned meat by placing it near his helmet, only to accidentally crush the helmet underfoot when the can finally gave way. Quirky anecdote.
Soldiers sometimes traded rations for local delicacies, cheese, bread, or homemade sausages, leading to spontaneous food fairs behind the lines. These exchanges were informal and risky, but boosted morale immensely. Historians still debate how much these black market trades affected military discipline and ration control. You tear open a can of stewed tomatoes, the bright red sauce a stark contrast to the gray landscape. Mixing it with the last of your biscuits, you create a makeshift sauce that tastes faintly of home. Across the fire, a soldier boils water for instant coffee, a ritual that brings a sense of normalcy and comfort. The bitter, dark liquid is a lifeline against exhaustion and cold. You sip slowly, feeling the warmth spread, chasing away the damp chill. You overhear a story about a unit that celebrated Christmas by pooling their rations and trading with locals for fresh poultry and vegetables. The feast was modest but memorable, a momentary reprieve from war's relentless grind. Historians still argue whether these small feasts were acts of rebellion against military austerity or essential morale boosters. Either way, food became more than fuel. It was a connection to culture and humanity. You nibble a piece of hardtack, feeling its familiar crunch as you listen to the crackling fire and distant echoes of artillery. For now, this simple meal is enough to sustain body and spirit as you face another day. The early morning light filters softly through the barracks window, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. You stretch and reach for your ration kit. Another day, another assortment of processed, canned, and occasionally questionable food items. The monotony of wartime meals is hard to escape, but you find small comforts in the routine. Among the standard rations, one item stands out: powdered eggs. You remember the first time you tried to make scrambled eggs from powder and water. The result was a spongy, rubbery mess that barely resembled breakfast, but at least was edible. Soldiers often joked that these eggs could double as makeshift erasers. A curious fact is that some soldiers mixed powdered eggs with coffee to make a breakfast shake. Not exactly a gourmet treat, but an inventive way to combine caffeine and protein. The taste was questionable, but the boost was appreciated during long patrols. Historians still argue whether powdered eggs truly contributed to nutrition or were more of a psychological tool to simulate normal meals. The shelf life and ease of transport made them a staple, but many preferred fresh food whenever possible. You open a small can of Spam, that iconic canned meat whose reputation swings wildly between beloved comfort food and infamous mystery meat. Soldiers often said, you love it or you tolerate it, and the truth probably lies somewhere in between. You slice off a piece, frying it over a small camp stove until crispy edges form, a small victory against blandness. You notice a fellow soldier spreading mustard on his bread, explaining that a little condiment makes a huge difference. Indeed, condiments were precious commodities, often traded or hoarded like treasure. Even a smear of jam or a dab of butter lifted spirits. There's a tale of a soldier who tried to make a Spam sandwich deluxe by adding a slice of cheese found in a scavenged package and a handful of pickles pilfered from a nearby supply. The result was messy but strangely satisfying, a reminder that even small culinary experiments could brighten the day. You sip on a tin of instant coffee, bitter and strong, savoring the bitter warmth. It's not quite the cafe experience, but it's enough to keep the engines running. As you prepare to move out, you tuck the last piece of fried Spam into your pack, a small comfort for the long day ahead. Food here isn't just survival. It's a patchwork of memories, ingenuity, and fleeting pleasures. The sun hangs low as you trudge along a dusty road, the hum of distant engines blending with the shuffle of weary feet. Meals on the move are a different beast, quick, rough, and sometimes downright grim. Yet the need to eat remains, no matter how chaotic the surroundings. MREs, or meals ready to eat, haven't quite made their debut yet, but the concept of portable, ready-to-consume rations was emerging. Soldiers relied on tins packed with dense, calorie-heavy food designed to survive rough conditions and long marches. Opening these tins was a small ritual,
a moment of calm amid the turmoil. You unwrap a K ration, a compact 3-meal set designed for paratroopers and mobile units. It contains canned meat, biscuits, candy, and even chewing gum. You pick through the contents, appreciating the variety, but missing the taste of fresh food. The ration is dense with calories, but light on flavor. An odd tidbit: some soldiers claimed that chewing gum was crucial not just for freshening breath, but for reducing stress and boredom during long patrols. Psychologists today would nod at that. Stress relief through simple, repetitive action is a well-known coping mechanism. Historians still debate the overall effectiveness of early field rations like the K ration. Were they truly convenient and nutritious, or did their monotony and blandness undermine morale over time? The answer is mixed, with plenty of soldier anecdotes on both sides. You spot a soldier breaking out a small tin of powdered chocolate, mixing it with water to create a thin, sweet drink. It's a brief taste of sweetness in an otherwise bland diet, a small treat that sparks smiles all around. Sometimes soldiers made clever use of their rations. One story describes a man who crafted a makeshift stove from an empty can, cooking his ration meat and heating water for coffee, turning a cold meal into something warmer and more satisfying. The smell of toasted crackers and heated meat mingles with dust and sweat, creating an oddly comforting aroma that sticks with you long after the meal is gone. As you march onward, the crunch of biscuits in your mouth and the bitter warmth of instant coffee remind you that even in the harshest conditions, food is a small but vital source of strength and normalcy. A gray dawn seeps into the camp as you rouse yourself, the distant clang of mess tins and low murmur of early risers marking the start of the day. The field kitchen is rudimentary, but essential: a canvas tarp, a few barrels, and a pot balanced over a small fire. In these moments, the simple act of preparing breakfast feels like a quiet rebellion against the surrounding chaos. You unwrap a package of C rations, the ubiquitous canned food that defined much of the soldiers' culinary landscape. Today's menu includes a can of pork and beans, some powdered eggs, and a small box of crackers. The pork and beans smell sweet and tangy, a stark contrast to the usual metallic taste of canned meat. A quirky wartime fact: some soldiers believed that adding a splash of coffee to their pork and beans improved the flavor. Whether this was true or just a rumor passed around to boost morale remains part of the ongoing debate among historians and veterans alike. You pour boiling water into a cup of powdered eggs, stirring as the yellowish mass forms. Less than appetizing, but better than nothing. You watch as a group mixes powdered milk into coffee, the resulting beverage a chalky, bitter concoction that somehow keeps spirits afloat. One soldier jokes that powdered milk is the breakfast of champions, if those champions have low standards. You laugh quietly, knowing the truth behind the jest. Historians still argue how much these powdered and canned foods actually contributed to soldiers' nutrition and morale. While they were lifesavers in many ways, the lack of fresh ingredients took a toll on health and spirits. You tear open a small package of chocolate, the sweet smell a balm against the monotony. Chocolate was prized, traded, and hoarded, not just for calories, but as a psychological boost. Outside, the sounds of the camp come alive: the clinking of utensils, distant laughter, and the rustle of maps being folded. Food here is more than nourishment. It's a momentary connection to home and a brief escape from the battlefield. As you finish your meal, you pack away the empty tins, already thinking ahead to the next ration and the next quiet moment by the fire. The sun has dipped low, casting a golden glow over the muddy trenches. The air is thick with anticipation and the faint smell of wet earth mixed with faint traces of food from mess tins. You sit on a crate, peeling open yet another ration pack. Familiar now, but always carrying that hint of uncertainty. Will it be edible today, or a culinary challenge? You find a small can of field bread, a dense, hard biscuit meant to last months without spoiling. Soldiers often joked that it could be used for hammering nails, or even as a weapon if rations ran out. Biting into it feels like crunching on a piece of wood, but with enough chewing, it softens enough to swallow. It's a far cry from the fresh bread you remember, but it fills a gap in your stomach. You remember hearing that soldiers sometimes soaked field bread in tea or soup to soften it, a trick passed down through the ranks. The practice was practical and comforting, turning the tough biscuit into a vehicle for flavor. Historians still argue whether these methods significantly improved morale or merely masked the monotony of the diet. In your pack, you also find a small tin of sardines, their oily richness a welcome contrast to the usual bland meats. The smell is pungent, but with a bit of mustard or a smear of jam, soldiers managed to make these tins a little more palatable. A quirky anecdote: some troops kept small jars of mustard or pickles liberated from local stores, hoarding them like treasure and using them sparingly to elevate meals. This guerrilla gourmet approach was a secret weapon against the dullness of rations. You hear laughter from a nearby group swapping ration items, the barter system in full effect. Cigarettes, chocolate, and condiments change hands as easily as coins, each trade a small act of survival and camaraderie. You crack open a small packet of instant coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. It's not just caffeine, it's a ritual, a moment to pause and gather strength. As night falls, the food is gone, but the memory of sharing, trading, and making do lingers. Food here is more than fuel. It's culture, comfort, and connection. You lean back, feeling the weight of the day ease just a little, wrapped in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring another meal, another story, another chance to find a small moment of peace.
The camp settles into silence as twilight fades into the soft darkness of night. You lie back on your cot, the day's hunger momentarily stilled by the modest meals that fueled you through cold mornings and long marches. The rituals around food, opening tins, swapping biscuits, sharing stories, fade into the comforting backdrop of survival. You think back to the diversity of what soldiers ate: tins of corned beef and powdered eggs, scavenged jungle yams and fried insects, makeshift feasts in bombed-out villages, and the ever-present bitter coffee. Each meal was a small victory over the hardships, a brief escape from the relentless tension. A quirky detail that sticks with you is the soldiers' nickname for their rations: meatballs of mystery or death in a can. Despite the humor, there was a deep respect for food's power to sustain and sometimes uplift. The struggle to balance nutrition, shelf life, and morale was ongoing, and historians still argue about the best approaches used during the war. You recall the stories of soldiers going to great lengths to improve their meals, trading, scavenging, cooking over makeshift fires, turning bland rations into moments of joy and community. Food was more than calories. It was a thread connecting home, hope, and humanity in a world torn apart. As you close your eyes, the memories of smoky campfires, muddy trenches, and quiet kitchens blend together, reminding you that even in the darkest times, the simplest comforts, warmth, companionship, a bite to eat, can make all the difference. Now the hunger fades, replaced by a gentle calm. The distant sounds of the camp grow softer, and your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind.